Hey, I'm here to do a review of Read My Lips. This is a new release from the Criterion Collection coming out on Tuesday, September 23rd. One of a pair of Jacques Audiard films directed by the French auteur, including The Beat That My Heart Skipped, which I will talk about in a few days, a little further down the road. But for now, I'm going to focus my attention on Read My Lips, or Sur les Lèvres in the French. Now, if you're a viewer of a certain age, like my own, you can't hear that phrase, read my lips, without thinking of this guy or this guy. Of course, that was a slogan that the former President George H.W. Bush unveiled. I think it was at the National Convention in 1988 when he was being nominated for president. He made that famous promises, read my lips, no new taxes. Kind of the biggest takeaway from his failed presidency, but I digress. Read my lips, sur mes lèvres, the French phrase, has to do with the fact that people who are hard of hearing, who have a hearing impediment, often have to resort to reading lips of the people who they're talking to, and sometimes people at a distance. You can sort of pick up on what they're saying, even if they're out of what's normally considered earshot. You know, the formation of the mouth, the way the words form visually can be picked up. And that talent, that skill, plays a very central role in this narrative film. So let's talk a little bit about Jacques Audiard. He's a French director who's been a kind of a very highly honored and highly respected member of the French cinema scene for really a few decades now. This is a film from 2001. Sometimes I see it credited as 2002, so it must have been right on the end of the year that it was originally released. Jacques Audiard, he is the son of Michel Audiard, pretty prominent and successful screenwriter in French films. He started, I think, in the late 1940s, continued writing up into the mid-80s, and his son Jacques, brought up obviously very comfortable within the kind of the French filmmaking scene, followed somewhat in his father's footsteps. In fact, they actually wrote a screenplay together towards the end of his father's life, and when Audiard was still primarily in that screenwriting role. He did become a director after about a decade or so of writing films. In the early 90s, he made a couple films that are referenced here, but this was kind of his big breakout. This is his third feature that actually ended up winning the César Award in France, both for, well, it didn't win the best film, but it had a best score, I believe, best actress, and best screenplay. And that actress, Emmanuelle DeVos, you see her very elliptically here. She's really the heart of the film. She is the lead, although Vincent Cassel, who you might know from this film, La Haine, from 1995, he's gone on to have a very successful career himself. So Vincent Cassel aged a little bit from the kind of young teenage or early 20s hooligan that he is in La Haine. He's a little bit more grown up now, but also a man with a past, an ex-con who's trying to get his life back on track. So Audiard is, to go back to the director bit just a little, he is a very skilled filmmaker who is very fluent in the kind of the philosophy and the lexicon of high-end cinema. He's not just a guy who got into showbiz because that's what his dad did. He is truly an artist who takes his craft extremely seriously, talks a great game because, you know, he's very meticulous about how he puts his films together. There's a lot of that on both of these discs. He gives kind of interviews that were filmed fairly recently, earlier this year or last year in 2024, about his approach to filmmaking. And even though in my previous clip, when I kind of first announced that I'd gotten these two films as review copies, I acknowledged I didn't really know a whole lot about him. I'm very impressed and very intrigued to deepen my familiarity with his work. I already understood at the time that I got these two films that he was a substantial movie maker, and one that, you know, definitely deserves to be taken seriously and reckoned with. I had just never found my way into getting into his films, but, you know, Criterion made it pretty easy for me by sending me these two films. So Read My Lips is the earliest of the two. It's the only one that's available in 4K. And I'll talk about the discrepancy there when I get into my review of The Beat That My Heart Skipped. But Read My Lips is a very compelling story. It kind of falls into the genre of a crime thriller. There's definitely a suspense element that kicks up, roughly, I don't know, a third of the way into the film, maybe even halfway through when it really ratchets up. But it starts as a kind of a character study of a young woman. I mentioned the hearing impairment. She is a young woman named Carla. She works in an office, some kind of construction or real estate company, and she's answering the phones. Now, she has a hearing problem, so why they have her working the phones and doing secretarial stuff, I guess maybe they're just giving her an opportunity, and maybe the hearing impairment is such that she can still, function in that role. In any case, she's a woman who is somewhat inhibited. Even though Emmanuelle DeVos herself is an attractive woman, she's not made up to present that way in this film. In fact, she's kind of, closed off and uptight. And there's a situation at the very beginning of the film where she faints during the course of her job, indicating maybe a need that has to have some relief or some support. She's overworked, overstressed, run ragged, and not really being very well appreciated either. So, in short, she's a woman with some inhibitions, and it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of socializing. She has one friend that she meets here and there, but into her life comes the Vincent Cassel character. His name is Paul. He's sent by a kind of a referring agency and a job service. He's brought into the office to sort of work with her as an assistant. Now, he is an ex-con. He's, like I said, he's just gotten out of jail and is in need for some kind of work that will make an honest man out of him, right? Well, they end up kind of becoming a little bit more than just co-workers, and yet her inhibitions and his kind of anxiety about slipping up and having to go back into the prison system kind of keep them at a little bit of a tension with each other. Like, they recognize maybe there's some attraction, but they don't really want to act on it. Things begin to get complicated when Paul's past becomes a little bit more intrusive on his present. He owes some money. There's some kind of shady deals going on, and he has some connections that he's kind of gravitating to, and ends up eventually leaving the office gig, but they continue their relationship, Carla and Paul, that is. That's really the setup. So from there, it gets into, some dirty money that's being stashed by the owner of a nightclub and a bar where Paul is now working, and there's some kind of thuggish people who are looking to maybe collect on that, or maybe the money's a little bit on the hot side, and it becomes, kind of a suspense setup, because Paul, recognizing Carla's ability to read lips, realizes that he might be able to get an angle on some of the dirty deals that are going down by positioning herself on the ledge of a building overlooking an apartment where these ne'er-do-wells are hanging out and having their conversations. Give her a pair of binoculars. She can literally read their lips, and he has some insight as to maybe how he can obtain some of that hot cash that's been stashed somewhere in that apartment. That's about as much as I'm going to say about the plot developments, because it does turn into a pretty satisfying genre thriller caper. Will they get away with it? How will this all go down? It is kind of a neo-noir. The interesting piece of it is that it's really a female-centered film. It's really centered on the character of Paula. And so in that sense, the Vincent Cassel Paul character is kind of like a homme fatale, if you get my drift. A man who takes an innocent woman, somewhat unassuming, and drags her into this very tense, very complicated criminal enterprise. So on the level of just kind of hooking you in and giving you a story with some kind of, indeterminacy, it's not real obvious how this is going to go. In fact, I learned from the making of and some of the supplements here that there were a lot of decisions made during the course of the film where they actually had a whole different ending. And you get to see some of those alternate scenes in the deleted scenes feature. It's about 10 minutes worth, but it definitely would take the story in some different directions. But this is a story primarily centered around Emmanuelle DeVos. You may not know her. She's had a pretty good career. She seems to still be somewhat active, but this is probably her greatest performance, and she really does an excellent job. She does pop up briefly in The Beat That My Heart Skipped, but this is probably the role that she will best be known for, other than the cumulative course of the work that I think has gone even into the last couple of years or so. So she gives a very compelling performance, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to get to know her character and see her kind of open up to the possibilities of life, even though it comes at some cost, and certainly a lot of pressure, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty about how this is all going to shake down. So I think this is probably a pretty good summary. I again have a lot of great things to say about Jacques Audiard that I've gotten to know about him. He's the kind of guy who makes films maybe primarily for the festival circuit set. He's the kind of guy who's going to be featured in magazines like Film Comment and Cineast. And when he gives an interview, he's going to give you some good stuff to work with. It may to some folks come across as a little pompous or pretentious. He is a guy who takes himself seriously as a creator of high-end cinema. And so from that perspective, maybe he's a little bit off-putting. And his films, while they're all, I mean, from what I've learned about him, the other Criterion title currently available is Depan, which I've watched the special features. I'm probably going to watch the movie in the next couple nights to get the full story. But he's a guy who takes on ambitious projects, and he's always looking for something kind of a unique angle to his films. This is very much a genre film, very much in the style of that neo-noir, Blood Simple and The Coens and, many others. Titles are not going to come to my mind right off the bat. I really don't need to get into films like this one, but it is, it does have the satisfying pleasures of a great, twisty, well-constructed crime thriller. But there's more to it than that, including a really nice soundtrack. One of the supplements on here is an interview with the French composer Alexandre Desplat, who you may know from his work with Wes Anderson, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest Hotel. He won an Oscar, an Academy Award for that. He also won an Academy Award a couple years ago for The Shape of Water. So I think he's become Wes Anderson's film, composer of choice, and he's got a great body of work. If you're not familiar with the name Alexandre Desplat, this is the supplement on here is an interview with him from 2002, where he's talking about his approach to writing film music. And so it's, from 20 plus years ago, but it's a great little opportunity to get to know the mind of an artist who takes his craft just as seriously as Jacques Audiard, and they do work very well together. There's also a nice commentary track on this disc that features Vincent Cassel and Emmanuelle DeVos talking to each other about their experiences of making the film. The commentary was recorded in 2002, so it was probably from the original DVD release, and it is in French, so you will have to read the subtitles if you don't, naturally hear or speak French with understanding. But it's a very nice track, just of them. You can tell they forged a genuine friendship here and really had some good time making the movie, and they do give some great insights into the development of their characters, their approach to the craft of screen acting, and their appreciation for Jacques Audiard and the creative team around them. The other big special features are an afterword by Audiard and a kind of a making of. These are two pieces that were created for this release by the Criterion Collection. I think they went over to Paris and did some interviews with the screenwriter, the editor. So you get a very good background, both from original release time as well as looking back 20 plus years later. And I will also say this, the 4K really looks great. This is a very, very nicely lit, well edited, highly professional bit of filmmaking from a guy who had a lot of good stuff ahead of him and was really kind of making his first big statement on film. Still within the genre sort of category, if you will, but you could tell he was ambitious and on his way to bigger and even more noteworthy things. So that's Read My Lips, Jacques Audiard, spine 1279 from the Criterion Collection, coming out on Tuesday, September 23rd. And I'll be back soon with my talks about The Beat That My Heart Skipped, directed by the same guy.